I'm Michael Genezareth. I'm also the research director of CodeX. And I appreciate the organizers giving us some time to talk about a couple of projects that are underway within CodeX that I think are related to the theme of this workshop in some interesting ways. I will point out that we're going to talk about the concept of computational law and some of the technologies that we're looking at about computational law more broadly and not specifically computable contracts. But I think there's a lot of relationship between this, and as we go through the working groups this afternoon, tomorrow, that may be desirable for you to think about some of these projects that are underway and consider whether they may have some positive benefit for this initiative. So we're going to change gears just a little bit here, but there's a lot of overlap, I expect. Also, the projects we're going to talk about are today of two sorts. One is a very speculative and new initiative, which I'm going to talk about first, called Corpus Legends. And then after I'm done, Abhijit Mohapatra is going to talk about a much more mature effort, which has actually already been fielded and is out there being used. And it's very closely related to computational law, computable contracts, and Corpus Legends. So I get to do the speculative stuff up front. Abhijit then gets to bring it down to earth and talk about some stuff that's really going on that's useful today. Okay, so bear with me as I get started here. So computational law, we've used this phrase for many years now as being one of the main themes of effort within CodeX. It's the branch of legal informatics having to do with the mechanization of legal analysis. And TurboTax is our standard example of a computational law system. It's an example of how law, if it's mechanized, can be put to work providing legal analysis for users. In this particular case, maybe planning to comply with the law. There might be compliance checking. There could even be regulatory analysis. But TurboTax is a really good example if you want to think about computational law systems, so we keep using it for that purpose. It becomes important. It's going to become increasingly important in the future as we move beyond just using laptops for ourselves, but also mobile systems of various sorts. That also, as Harry was mentioning earlier, autonomous devices like robots and self-driving cars. So there's going to be a bigger and bigger and more potential play for computational law as these technologies mature. Okay, now, how do you build computational law systems? This is one of the questions I want to begin, what I want to address before as a way of motivating Corpus Legends. Well, there's a couple of ways. One is to use traditional standard software engineering techniques. You hire a programming team, and what they do is they build a specific piece of software to embody a particular portion of the law and to perform a particular task, like the tax laws or the regulations, the IRS regulations, and then there's fill out the tax form. So you build this special purpose piece of code that does that task well. In the artificial intelligence world and in much of what we've been doing in CodeX, we've been looking at a different approach where we treat regulations as data. We factor the regulations out of the code and produce a piece of regulation-independent software that can be applied to multiple different sets of regulations and do that task no matter what the regulations say. So make the regulations into data rather than making them part of the software of the system. Write them in what's called a declarative form, a form that can then be used in a variety of different ways. In particular, you could have, if you build your systems this way, the possibility of building one system that could have multiple regulations, either alternatives or maybe combined. You could put in regulations from federal, state, and local and have them intermix different states, different local jurisdictions, and they intermix without having to reprogram the system. And that's one of the real benefits of trying to architect systems in this fashion. And the other alternative is that one set of regulations can be used for multiple purposes. It could be put into various different pieces of software to do different things. You could do compliance checking, you could do compliance planning, you can do regulatory analysis and so forth with the same encoding of that set of regulations. And so this is why we're excited about this particular architecture for systems, so-called declarative programming approach to building these systems. It's going to make it much easier to scale this technology as we move forward. Okay, so what we've been doing here at CodeX to support this is a couple of things. First of all, we have been using a language, which around here is called Epilogue. It's an example of a logic programming language, which allows one, within the same language, to codify facts of cases. Here I've chosen an example from business rules, a business rule, rather than a governmental rule. So you can codify facts like who's in what office and who manages whom and so forth. But the interesting thing about Epilogue is it's not just a data system, data language, it's also a language for capturing regulations and rules. You can have definitions of concepts, invent these new concepts, like what does it mean to be an office mate? Okay, it means to share an office. But more importantly, it allows one to define definitions of what's legal, what's not legal in various different settings, or what the penalties would be if you were to violate the law and that sort of thing. So here it's a simple example. Yeah, you're not allowed to, managers can't share an office with their subordinates. Okay, so here's a language which allows one to codify those things. Again, it's logic programming more broadly. We've chosen a specific thing very similar to a language called Prologue with some variations, but this one's called Epilogue. All right, now going along with Epilogue, we've been looking at building software, open source software, by the way, that you folks can use, to, first of all, building an interpreter for this language, which allows you to then take regulations, take data, combine them together, and produce legal analysis of various different sorts by just running the software. That actually exists in a variety of different systems. They're public. There are other companies out there who are doing similar kinds of things. One of the things that's particularly good about this, and it's Abhijit is the author of this, is that we've also created an interactive development environment, a system wherein one can develop new rules and debug them and apply them to sample data to determine whether they're working correctly or if they're not working correctly, to figure out very quickly and easily what was wrong, where did I code my rules incorrectly. And that's actually been extremely valuable to us in building systems based on the Epilogue language. Okay, so this is the kind of work that's been going on here, sort of under the hood, not very well publicized, but it's been very valuable to us in building systems using this architecture. And what has happened most recently is that we've launched a new platform called Worksheets to allow one to build legal worksheets of a variety of different sorts and to make them available to the world. So this is a topic which Abhijit is going to center on. And it's what I call the more or less mature technology, by comparison to Corpus Legends anyway, that Abhijit will talk about in a few minutes. But we're not the only ones. There are others who are doing similar things. Neota Logic in our community, MeWe, and then there are more broadly, there's Logic Blocks, JLog, and a variety of other companies that are producing similar technologies today. Okay, that's what we've been working on in the past, and I think it's relevant here when you talk about the part of computable contracts that is concerned with their being computable. Namely, you can actually determine whether or not a given situation the contract is satisfied or not satisfied, or perhaps maybe to determine whether it's consistent or incomplete and so forth. Okay, but it's not concerned with blockchain, it's not concerned with contract formation, it's concerned with contract execution. That would be the relevance to what you folks are doing. Coming back to the general question of computational law, however, I want to talk about where we stand today in our development of this computational law technology. So the way I just described it to you, you can use one set of regulations and use it for many different purposes. But if you're a different group, you would presumably be developing that set of regulations on your own. You'd not only be writing your software or importing software, but you'd also be developing your own regulations. And that's fine and dandy so long as you're working on one set of regulations and somebody else is working on a different set. So somebody's doing financial and somebody's doing taxes and somebody's doing permits. Those are all fine because there's no conflict there and there's no problems there. But when you start building multiple applications within the same area, we find that it can be conflicts. And there can also be a lot of redundancy, which can lead to both those conflicts, but can also lead to just wasted work. So in this past year, we've been looking at how we might economize here on the effort and potentially scale more rapidly if we were to organize this in some way and go to a shared rule authoring approach, where multiple groups who are working on computational law systems, developing these regulations, formalizing these regulations, could share their work with each other. And thus, if two groups were working on the same area, they could coordinate, collaborate, or reuse the work of others. And in our own work, we found that there's more value of this because we've been doing the same thing over and over again in different areas and finding that to be wasteful. So maybe we should consolidate this effort to some extent. So we've begun looking at the possibility here within CodeX of creating an infrastructure that would support shared rule authoring. And that's what Corpus Legends is. So this is a very grand ambition, but we think it also has some low-hanging fruit that we can take advantage of. So most broadly, Corpus Legends is an online library of regulations in computable form. That's what we want to do. Build a single repository. It doesn't mean the other's to be the only one in the world, but we want to have at least one. And we'll provide a repository for those regulations in computable form that others can use and draw upon once you make a deposit within the library. Okay, so the scope is primarily governmental regulations at this point, and possibly forever, and that's already enormous scope. But the scope could be all branches of the government, not just, say, we're not just talking to lawyers here, we're talking about availability for regulations that affect what the executive branch does, as well as what the judicial branch does. It also includes multiple jurisdictions, federal, state, and local. And that's what we're targeting, is that community. What we want to do is to be the first repository in the world of regulations in computable form that is comprehensive. In other words, it covers all the regulations. So when you're trying to determine whether a building satisfies building codes, you would check state, local, governmental regulations, not just one jurisdiction, but all of those. Okay, so that's what we're looking to, that's what we're aspiring to, is to kind of assemble this. Once when you produces that system of that sort, the capabilities, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, what you have to provide to make that possible, also applies to other kinds of laws, in quotes. So organizational business rules are an example of that. Here on the campus, we have been deploying, as Abhijit will mention, some of this technology to administer university rules in academic programs across all the departments in the university. And that seems to be extremely successful, and we expect to roll that out to other universities before long. Well, those rules, whether they're governmental rules having to do with privacy, or privacy, are the kinds of things that could reside within a branch of Corpus Legends. There's also contracts with guerrillas. Now, here's a direct relationship to perhaps to the computable contracts area. Namely, I'm speaking here about guerrillas being the big companies, health insurance companies, for example, home insurance companies, auto insurance companies. These insurance companies are the guerrillas of that space. You as an user, as an individual customer, don't get to say very much about those contracts. You subscribe to them or you don't. And that's it. So codifying those would help a lot of people understand the relevance to them of a particular health insurance contract and whether something is covered or not covered. And so we treat that almost like law in what we're thinking about right now. And by the way, there's also a branch of this which has been going on for some time, which is games. Games have laws, right? They're the rules of the game. And actually, it's a great way of training people how to use the technology, is to get them to write the rules of games. Because the rules of the government, well, it's kind of like the rules of the game. In fact, it's the same language we've used. In fact, we've been using for 10 years now to codify games rules. And so that is also in here kind of as an educational branch. But Corpus Legends is defined as being governmental regulations. It just has these other potential opportunities. Okay, now what are we going to provide within Corpus Legends, and how is this going to work? So I have two more slides, I'm done on this. First of all, there's what does the user see? What does the user get when they go to corpuslegends.org? And what they get is a website where they can find the regulations and download the regulations, and there's a variety of other things they can do as well, which I'll talk about in just a second. But the most important ones are these. So first of all, you can find regulations trivially by feature search. Okay, I want to know all the tax regulations in the state of Wyoming. Okay, that's pretty easy to do using keyword search. But it's a lot harder to know specifically when you have a particular situation what regulations apply. And so we've been looking into how we might do what's called semantic search, where the user defines a scenario, specifies the facts of the scenario, and says to the system, please tell me whatever regulations apply here, whether they're state, local, or federal regulations, by looking at the context of the scenario, and not just potentially giving some legal analysis based on, on what's available within Corpus Legends, but also saying, here are the regulations you want. And then allowing the user to download those regulations if that's in fact what he wants. So this is a brand new capability. It basically is comp law, but it may be hypothetical. It's using a scenario as kind of a key, as a search of the regulation database. And so that's what we're working on right now and trying to see whether we can make that practical. And finally, something that one of our funders is interested in is, okay, you've got a body of regulations, and I've got this sample set of sample data which I've been using to test the regulations. What if I were to change the regulation in some way? What would happen? And so we've been looking at, okay, can you say what the results change would be? And the results of the sample scenarios that we've got in your database to say, okay, well, these people, 10% would change of the past cases would change value, or the sum of all the penalties would increase by 50%, something like that. So that's something that we're being asked to look at by one of our funders. Okay, so that's the kind of interaction you would have with Corpus Legends, and then there'd be a download button that says, okay, download these regulations, and then you could do whatever you want with them in building out whatever application you're working on. So how do we do this? Who's going to build it? Well, I don't know the answer to that, but we're hoping that by putting the system there and by putting some capabilities there, that will hopefully get some uptake that will help us deal with this tremendous scale problem that we have with building out something like Corpus Legends. So first of all, we're providing via the system a variety of different supports for doing this. It's this interactive development environment I was discussing earlier. It happens to be called Sierra. These standard data sets and rule sets that are things like tell me all the simple things like all the states, all the countries in the UN, and trivial data sets like that, units conversion tables and so forth, are the kinds of things that will be provided automatically in the system. And then there's some data integration capabilities based on past research to deal with the fact that two different groups might end up calling things different things, and they have to integrate their data and their structure of their data. So we'll be providing that stuff as part of the Corpus Legends framework. We'll also provide things like Epilogue, the software, so that people want to use that to interpret the rules. They can also use that, download that software as well as the regulations themselves. So who's going to build it now? Okay, well, we're starting, and we've got several corpora of rules that we're including. I'd say it probably amounts right now to 0.00001% of the regulations in our scope. But it's something that's there, and we're going to try to do more and more and more and more until we've got something that people find sufficiently valuable. We're hoping to draw upon our students and our affiliates to help us with that. We're starting this computational law clinic here where law students and others will potentially work on projects. And one of those projects would be to further flesh out some of the Corpus Legends space. We're hoping ultimately that there will be some uptake on this, and we'll get a kind of a Wikipedia-style thing going on where people will make contributions, and that would be great. And we're hoping ultimately to get regulators in certain areas to make the contribution. And instead of sending out natural language descriptions of the regulations and having somebody else convert them, we're hoping that within a couple of spaces that we might find regulators willing to do the codification if we can provide the tools and the language for them to do. And we've found that there is interest in a number of different federal and local jurisdictions for doing this, like the IRS. Okay, and the arrangement would be everything's open source, it's free, but we have talked about the possibility that some folks might want to be willing to pay for this ultimately and service, and there's also others who might do it if they were paid. And so we might find that there would be, for some regulations, people might provide them, but there's a fee involved. And if that would make it work, well, I'm not averse to supporting that kind of interaction, though we'd like to make sure that what is free remains free. Okay, so I don't have other ideas on this, but if any of you have ideas, if any of you would like to contribute, if any of you would have suggestions on how we can make it go, I'd much like to hear them. So this is just getting underway. Corpus Legends is like 30 days old, brand new. The technologies that are being combined here are not, but the concept itself is brand new, and we're going to hope that we can make some progress with it in the coming year. And I think that's it for me to talk about Corpus Legends. Just want to let you know about that. And now from the, or we should stop there. Any immediate questions? Yes?
Open source and accessible outside Stanford, anybody can use it?
Yes, yes, it's corpuslegends.org, by the way. There's also corpuslegends.stanford.edu, but it's corpuslegends.org.
And Epilogue is accessible to everybody too? Epilogue?
Epilogue is open source, that's correct. That's right. Anybody else?
Thanks. Do you use, or are you aware of the markup language for laws and regulations in JSON by the OpenGov Foundation? How does that relate to what you're doing?
I'm aware of some of those. I don't know if I'm aware of all of those, but certainly I'm aware of some of those, yes.
It's a good one, and we've been using it in the Media Lab for some mostly city councils and local ordinances, and getting, when they transform the law as one of the open data sets, which it certainly should be, and it ought to be structured. So anyway, there's a little thing bubbling up similar to the vision you just said, but much more mundane. It'd be great to have those two, parts of the railroad connect.
Sounds great. Let's have a chat about that afterward. I will say that just to be clear, I'm not saying this to disagree with what I think you're actually talking about, to make sure that I just want to split a hair, which is there are multiple markup languages for laws today, which basically are ways of annotating texts of laws with semantic tags. And that does not necessarily allow us to compute the answers of the law. It allows us to find the laws more easily, but it doesn't allow us to compute answers to whether something is legal or illegal. That is not computational law.
That's right. It is, most of the specification we use for this is an API.
Right,
We
right.
have a test harness for the jurisdictions, and it's a big pain in the butt. But it's plumbing stuff that ought to be the stuff you're talking about.
I'm with you on that. The word markup is what I wanted to respond to. Okay, any other questions?
How do you assure the quality, completeness, and correctness of the content?
I erased that line from the slide because I didn't have a good answer to your question. One of the beauties of capturing information in logical form, in logic programming, is that it is possible to detect inconsistencies and incompleteness in those using mechanical means. What is not possible to detect is whether it's correct or not. And so somebody could write total gibberish in there that is complete and correct, but it doesn't represent the law at all. And so there is a question about how we're going to do it. As long as we're doing that here within CodeX, we're okay, because we are the quality assurance people ourselves. When we go to a Wikipedia-style thing, we're going to have to deal with it. So what I erased was a series of editors and technologies that would potentially address that problem, but I don't have the answer, and it's a really good question. Yeah.
Well, somehow related to the previous question. So, okay, you might have multiple pieces of legislation in the system, and then you have different people contributing to them. And essentially, you might have that the same regulation is written by different editors. And one of the problems is if you have two logicians in the same room and you speak about the same problem, they will come up with two different logics.
Right.
If you have two lawyers for the same document, they will write in three different ways. So what about the alignment of the terms used? So what about if you have a term, let's say, due diligence in one of the documents, and again, the same term is used, but with a different interpretation in other documents? So how do we ensure consistency of the terms used inside a document by different editors, and what about the alignment of the same term in different documents?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's actually not unrelated to the question of as you said. So the answer, first of all, is I don't know how many logics we will have in the terms of the logical formalism. There's more likely to be several, and several people in this audience would want to contribute in that regard. Or maybe we'll standardize on one for all of Corpus Legends. We're starting with Epilogue because it's what we have here, and we'll grow it as in consultation with colleagues. The issue of the logic is one thing. The issue of the words, the terminology, is a second one. And then once you agree on the terminology, there's a question about whether you're writing the right things to the wrong things. As for terminology, gee, that's my area of expertise. I've been working on data integration for 20-some years now, which is how you take multiple different vocabularies and align those vocabularies. And there is some technology that exists. It doesn't mean it's magic. It doesn't solve the problem automatically, but at least we're aware of that. We have some technology that will address that. So you can maintain things in your terminology, I can maintain things in my terminology, and then there's other technology which bridges the gap. Now, the hope is that we're going to have some kind of a balance between standardizing vocabularies and standardizing the structure of the schemas, and on the other hand, allowing for some variety there, but mapping between them. How it's going to play out is going to be seen. And I don't have like a silver bullet that says this problem goes away entirely. It doesn't, just as the problem of correctness doesn't go away.
So the examples of Epilogue that you've shown were very similar to the types of things you could express, say, with RDF and ontologies, because you're expressing relationships. What else do you do with the language that actually generates events or shows actions in addition to definitions of relationships?
Yeah, so there's two. First of all, RDF doesn't do what we do because it doesn't actually have, RDF, pure RDF doesn't have logic associated with it. It's just a schema
Right, but
language.
the definition of relationships that you showed in the language where these things relate to each other is an isomorphism. But I'm curious what Epilogue does in addition.
Well, we should talk technically because there's some specific things that that Epilogue, which has been ongoing independently of much of the work in the semantic web and RDF world,
Yes.
continues. And there are good arguments as to what it does and what it does well and efficiently, as opposed to things that remain undecidable or unanalyzed. And so that's one of the reasons why we chose Epilogue, is it's a well-studied thing that's been around for a very long time based on data log and Prolog. And it has solved some of those problems, and we haven't seen the solutions yet. But anyway, this is an example of potentially multiple ways of codifying the information. I was just trying to give a short answer to that. There's actually a long discussion to go into that. So I think the answer is whether RDF is going to be the right part of it. It's not. RDF by itself doesn't do that. Right now, RDF Plus does other things, does in fact address this question of these definitions. Now, you also asked about actions and time. Epilogue has a mechanism, in fact, it's part of what's called dynamic logic programming, which in fact deals with change and actions and time. So that part is actually covered. I didn't illustrate it here because I just didn't want to get into the details of that, but that's the important part of legal analysis, is who did what when and in what order. This is really critical, but that is supported. It's not an extension that's needed. It's already there.
Sure, and this is one of the traditional challenges of if it's RDF, AL, ontologies, whatever. They describe a state of the universe at a point in time.
Right.
They have a harder time dealing with time itself when things change, and evolutions of that universe, and that's what happens in most contracts.
Absolutely the case. So we do deal with that, right? Because we have some cases where we are in fact concerned with that, and we do believe that we have a solution to that. But you just put your finger on something which is critical, which is if you only have partial information about what happens, what order it happens, and so forth, it may be difficult to capture that, as it is in other areas. This is a very technical question, which I'm happy to talk about with you, but I can have a short answer to that.
Yeah, hi, Ram here from NIST. I have 3 comments. One is there's this whole issue of National Center for Biomedical Ontologies at Stanford. There's a lot of ontologies have been built in annotations, and all those things have happened. Are there any lessons that we can learn from that in the legal world? And the second comment is that you've been working on KIF and things like that for a long time. What have you learned from that experience of developing a knowledge interchange format in the ocean of logic? And the third comment I have is this notion of RDF versus logic kind of thing, because as you know, that RDF has been developed with a certain intent of semantic web in mind. But is that way that we should be going for a different kind of purpose? Because logic is more expressible than the RDF format that they have. So, thank you.
Those are all good questions, and did you want an answer? Or maybe there were comments, not the questions. I don't know.
Well, the comments and kind of questions.
Yeah, right.
I want your comments.
I fully subscribe to everything you said. I mean, I think those were all my concerns, and my concerns about. We got to have a whole other discussion about the RDF, AL, DAML, so forth world versus the logic programming world, and we'd never resolve those. I think it may have to be resolved here. We're going the logic programming approach here with what we're doing. That's not to say we wouldn't ultimately go incorporate other things. We'll have to see how to make that work.
The question I really have there is that there's all this thing going on for a long time. I mean, this debate has been going on for a decade, as far as I know right now. I mean, much before the previous decades, but for the last decade, things are going. So where are we heading to in this?
Well, first of all, we're talking about law, first of all, not all doing everything in the world. Yeah. So when you look at the ontology work, it's everything in the world. When you look at the medical experience, which has been driving a lot of the ontology work, then you'll find that a lot of that is ontology work in the abstract, without anybody building any applications. People building the applications, driving the ontology work. It's been sort of upside down. It's top-down standardization rather than bottom-up standardization. And what we're proposing to do here is bottom-up standardization. We build out segments of the rules and regulations as they're used in somebody's system. And when we download them into, or upload them into Corpus Legends. And that's the case. It'll be driven by application. And I think that's different from the way it's been done in much of the work in the research community, which is mostly coming in from the top. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot of work been done on ontologies, but ontologies are only part of the question. There's also the question of actually codifying the laws, using the data that is, using the ontology for some purpose. And when you use it for some purpose, you place that places constraints on what ontologies you really want. So we really want to build this from the bottom up for that reason. Anyway, I'm not saying that should all be, that's all relevant here, right? We're very far along. We have these guys to stand on their shoulders. We can stand on their shoulders and learn from their efforts. But what I don't want to do is to simply say that they've solved the problem, because I don't think they have. Yeah, okay. Anyway, okay, this is far more than, I didn't mean to have a discussion of this. I only wanted to introduce you to this, and I really wanted to get Abhijit over here to talk about worksheets, which is more mature and has many more answers to questions than I have, I think. Abhijit, you ready?
You can ask him.
Do you want this or do you want that? Do you want this or do you want that? You can have this or this.
All right. I'm fine with this. Hi everyone, I'm Abhijit. I'm a CS PhD student at Stanford, and Mike is my advisor. So I really hope this talk goes well and well received. First of all, I just wanted to thank CodeX for organizing this event and giving me an opportunity to present my work and my take on this burgeoning field of computational law and computable contracts. So let's dive right into the topic of what worksheets are. Worksheets are dynamic active forms. These allow users to interact with them in some manner and manage small to medium-sized structured data. And as the users interact with these worksheets, the changes from the underlying regulations are computed and shown to the user in some visible representation of the data. Now, the scope of a worksheet, it can be natively deployed on your laptop, on your mobile devices, or it could be web-based. Or in this brave new world, it could be one of those smart devices or other smart doohickeys. Our interest right now is on legal worksheets, how we can use worksheets in the legal domain. And the poster child of a legal worksheet is TurboTax. For something as annoying as tax preparation, it has made the process of preparing your taxes, computing your taxes, interacting with the IRS relatively pleasant. And and I want to emphasize that as users are interacting with the TurboTax application, the embodied portion of the tax law is the cranks are turned and the user is given feedback on the tax amount owed and maybe sometimes explanations about why that amount is so and so forth, why the deductions are so forth. Now, going beyond tax preparation, worksheets can also have other legal applications in the areas of compliance with privacy policies, managing intellectual property rights, finding out whether a building complies with the zoning codes and so forth. In healthcare, especially when there are laws that are crossing the boundary of federal and state regulations. In labor law, in e-commerce regarding import and export of goods and services, and many more. The odd thing is that there has been an enormous growth in the power of computing, the so-called Moore's law, and we are soon approaching a singularity towards quantum computing. So why hasn't legal worksheets taken off? Why hasn't citizen-centric applications making citizens closer to the government, interacting with the legal domain in a more TurboTax-like manner, why hasn't that taken off? So this is, and one of the hypotheses that we think is the place where the problem originates is that the process of creating one of these worksheets is enormously complex at this time being. Focusing on web-based worksheets, typically one has to be familiar with the full stack of technologies ranging from client side, where one has to have significant expertise in JavaScript, HTML, and all that styling stuff, and also in server-sided technologies before they can build one of these complex systems. If you want to outsource that work, the cost of development is extremely high. In a recent survey that we conducted with tech companies, some of which were legal tech companies, we found that the cost of development of a minimum viable product is roughly 4 to 6 months, which is extremely high. We believe, and we have made it possible, that this process can be tremendously and dramatically simplified for developers to create worksheets in an extremely short amount of time and maintain it in a much shorter amount of time. And along the way, we've also made it possible for non-developers alike to build worksheets without significant programming expertise, just as one could set up a spreadsheet by specifying mathematical formulas. We have made it possible for users without significant programming expertise to build worksheets by specifying logical formulas instead. Our philosophy is that building and configuring these worksheets can be and should be a do-it-yourself process. And as Mike had been talking about, the key to our approach is to have the underlying regulations in these worksheets as dynamic programming rules. To test our ideas and our hypotheses, we've set up a web-based platform accessible at worksheets.stanford.edu. This is a platform where users can go sign up. It's completely cloud-based. There is no installation needed. That's one of my pet peeves. I don't want to install something that's not absolutely needed. You can go in there, sign in, start creating worksheets without having to code, use dashboards to manage your worksheets. And the kind of worksheets that we offer can range from standalone legal calculators. You can build them without having to worry about persistence or anything. Or they can also be collaborative worksheets. So what I'm going to do next is briefly talk about some of the actual deployments of worksheets, the products of this platform, across campus, across local and federal governments, and so forth, to give you an idea about the broad range of applicability in the legal sphere. Close to my heart and close to Stanford is the area of academic program management, which Mike raised in his talk. As the School of Engineering puts it, and since this is this workshop, the event is on computable contracts, I would like to mention this, that the School of Engineering defines program sheets as a quote-unquote contract, and quotes are with the angular quotes, between the student and the School of Engineering, which outlines the requirements, the academic requirements that the student must comply with in order to graduate. To give you a story of what the stage was at an advanced school like Stanford a year ago, is that this process was paper-based. Students started filling in their program sheets. They had no idea. They had to squint through a huge handbook which had the list of regulations. Regulations crossed over from departmental regulations to school regulations to university regulations, kind of like what Mike was talking about. There are many interacting regulations managed by different parties. And students were kind of lost in this whole sea, and they had to have repeated talks with their advisors about the same repetitive things that could be automated. So what we ended up doing was build up online program sheet with all these rules embodied, all these departmental rules, all these school rules, all these university rules embodied within the program sheet, so that now the process is as simple as student comes in, fills in which courses he has taken, and he gets instantaneous feedback about the degree to which he complies with academic program requirements. Not only for the students, this process has transformed the process of approving and verifying program sheets for the administrators. To give you an idea of what that job was like, I have interviewed almost all of them on campus, and in spring quarter is hell for them. They have to go through 200 or so paper program sheets. They have to do trivial things like arithmetic calculations, non-standard calculations, go through each folder and find out, oh, this student has not deviated. Maybe I should ask him or her to do something else. Now that task is as simple as just going through a program sheet. If they don't see any red markers, which are one way of highlighting inconsistencies, they are done. They are happy. It's done. The only cases that they need to worry about is cases where inconsistencies crop up. And to give you about the degree to which this project has taken off, right now we have full coverage between the School of Engineering. We are branching out to other schools as well right now. And the tools that Mike was talking about, Epilogue has been around for a while. And these technologies these worksheet technologies, we've been using it within the CS department for over 7 years now to manage the master's programs. Going beyond the academic domain, so I had the opportunity and the good fortune of presenting our technology in the Legal Informatics class, where the students had the option of building legal tools that could be deployed and used by citizens and people to help with the task. So in this class, students were introduced to our platform, and they ended up building some really cool applications. So the application that you are seeing right now is a fantastic example of a standalone worksheet where you actually don't want data persistence. It's an extremely emotional and a sensitive topic where you want to be guided through the move-away statutes, but you want to remain anonymized in the same process. There were other worksheets that were created which are more as people are gearing towards the job markets, evaluating job offers based on shares that were offered by companies and based on the tax laws from different states where they were going to get a job at. There was the worksheet on due diligence, and there was also the worksheet that would be more relevant to me on when to file for OPT and STEM extensions and so forth. We've also been talking to local and city governments. So this is a classic case which happened actually this week. We found out that one of the more critical issues for the city of San Jose was in the preparation of business tax rules. The process of, the municipal code for business tax is scattered all around the place. There are so many exceptions, and it's an extremely hard task for the users of the taxpayers to figure out how much tax they owe to the city, and for cities to manage that themselves. So what we ended up doing was we encoded the regulations. So this is a worksheet that was built by us recently. So to contribute to the repository of growing regulations in Corpus Legends, we ended up encoding the municipal code relevant to the business taxes for San Jose, and we have published that in Corpus Legends, and we've also been leveraging that in the worksheet, which actually serves as the actual calculator. Now, these calculators could be embedded in the actual business registration forms or renewal forms, the renewal certificate forms that are issued by the city, so that the taxpayers, as they are registering their companies or organizations, can immediately get feedback as to how much tax they owe. That keeps them in the loop. We've also been sponsored by MITRE to help make the process of filing for disability benefits and having those disability benefits approved for the veterans. Turns out, in conjunction with MITRE, we identified that this process is an extremely laborious process with a backlog of almost 2 years. Our task here is to leverage computational law so that the law becomes closer to the application, so that just as with TurboTax, just as with all these different applications, we want to make the process more transparent as possible, more automated as possible, so that as veterans are filling these forms, they are kept in the loop. They know where they are in the process. They have an idea about what are the potential benefits even before it has been approved. It also gives a chance to the veteran service officers or the analysts who are deciding how much compensation the veterans are paid to analyze different hypothetical scenarios, to apply the law and to find out how much compensation is owed to the veteran. So this is another interesting application, the rules of which, again, are published in the Corpus Legends repository for now. So collaboration is another interesting feature that we are, one of the highlights of our platform. Worksheets could be standalone by themselves. As Mike was saying, you could build your own regulations, manage your own regulations. But what becomes interesting is when you are working in an environment, when you have multiple interacting rules, multiple interacting groups. Just as we want a shared rule environment, we can have worksheets that talk to each other. They can collaborate with each other. This is the graphic that you are seeing up front is from an application called Space Czar within the CS department. So there are different political policies in the department about who manages, who controls which room, and how rooms are to be assigned to different like levels of students and so forth. So here there are different heterogeneous worksheets that are showing different views and different sets of exposing different sets of regulations to different concerned parties. One being the actual occupant of the room, one being the room manager and the room owner, and the floor manager and so forth. So this is more or less what our platform is about. To give you an idea of who our team is right now, so this is a joint effort from Stanford CS department. Mike and I are involved there, and from the Stanford Law School, we have fellows, and Roland, who's been actively involved in this project. And we've been working with Stanford University Registrar's Office and the individual departments, and the VA, MITRE, and San Jose, who are consumers of our Worksheets applications for now. So thank you. Questions, comments?
I think it's very good that you are providing wizards for tools for making procedural requirements and dialogues work better for private companies. But there are two questions I have. First of all, how do you know, if you are authoring things privately, how do you know, how would somebody else trust if there's going to be in a contract or something that is agreed between counterparties that they in fact know what is behind the curtain, so to speak? And secondly, the fact that you're doing this in these sort of proprietary, sort of active-passive producer-consumer relationships with private entities is all well and good. But if you're building this on spreadsheet interactions, it's almost like taking a step backward to the days where information is hidden inside of spreadsheets. And so for the broader purpose of more universal application amongst counterparties, it might be more difficult to use. So
to address one of the questions that was one of the comments is, so regarding the opacity of what goes on within a worksheet. First of all, the rules are visible to whoever. So to the application user, the rules are not visible. But in many cases, if somebody wants to download a worksheet application, let's say a standalone worksheet application, the rules are visible. The underpinnings are visible in a rule-like format. So, for example, if you downloaded, let's say, the business tax calculator, you could actually see through all the implemented statutes and regulations in an epilogue-like language format. Sorry,
Yeah.
Mike, did you want to jump in? Yeah, the second aspect is, good, thank you for the plug. Yeah, so one of the aspects that, in addition to having the rules in a more high-level format, we also support the ability to generate control semi-natural language explanations of consequences. So that is a step towards transparency even for the application user. So just as you could, so if you, for example, in a veterans benefits case, if you saw that your compensation amount was, let's say, $546 per month, why is that the case? So you could dig through the explanation step by step, going on what statutes were applied, what portion of the code was consulted, what exception was applied, exemption was applied, and so forth. That is
So
one.
I realized I had one extra question. That was when you mentioned the Veterans Administration case and you had rules that needed to be followed, as opposed to, say, a private company policy that was just to be proposed for internet interaction. If you're starting with an existing body of rules, is there a means to translate those rules and regulations into the tool, or do you have to do that manually?
So that has to be done manually.
Okay.
If there's no further questions, maybe we can go ahead and thank Abhijit and then give everybody about a 10-minute break.